Be talking about the art of dialed in today. And I have to tell you, though, that back in '99 when pinball took a big crash, all of us in the industry, we just kind of figured that pinball was done for. We figured we might see one in a flea market all beat up, you know. But so it's a pleasant surprise to walk in here and see a lot of games, you know, that look really great and a lot of generations playing them. So thanks for that. I'm the art guy, and I see a couple other art guys out there, a couple of game designers, but when I tell somebody what I do who isn't familiar with pinball, they say, well, do you design the games? And I have to say, no, guys like John Trudeau designs the games, you know. Yeah, exactly. And actually, my neighbor back in Illinois, my next door neighbor lived next door to me for 10 years before he realized I didn't actually paint every single cabinet. He thought I was in my basement painting cabinets all day long. I guess the easiest way to say it is the game designer designs the game, the physical appearance of the game or the physical parts of the game, and I'm the decorator. I hate that word because I think I'm decorating curtains or something like that, but there's a lot of real estate on a pinball machine, and there's got to be art on almost all of it. So that's what I do. Quickly, though, the number one, at least for me, the number one rule in pinball art is the artist is responsible for drawing a player up to the game. And I think this goes back to competition when there were arcades with banks of pinball and video games, and a player walks in there, and the owner of the company wants that player to walk up to your game, you know. So you do whatever trick you can to get the player up there. After that, it's up to the gameplay and the strategy to keep the player there. So a lot of responsibility there. Let's see, next slide. Mike? Next? Oh, okay. I have a little quiz here, and at the end, if you give me your name and address, Jack told me we're going to send you something. So I was supposed to have something here, but my sources dried up on me. So anybody know, this is probably an easy one, what game this is from? And by the way, it's a black and white pencil sketch from a Backglass from a game. Nobody knows, so nobody's going to get anything. Yeah, not you, the guy in the orange shirt. What's that? Yes, that's correct. It's in the background on the left-hand side. So if you come up, give me your information. Not now, at the end, okay? Don't let me forget. Go ahead, Mike. Next slide. Yeah, exactly. You get nothing. You get nothing. Let's see. When Twilight Zone, when we finally had prototypes when we were building it, I think it was like in '92, we'd put the prototypes out on test. So this is a photo at a bar in Woodstock, Illinois, as I recall. And the guy in the white shirt, let me look at my copy here, because otherwise I'll be bending over. The guy in the white shirt is the game designer of Dialed In, Pat Lawler. And right in front of him is Larry DeMar, a pinball legend, done a lot of programming and management, everything, has his own company now. To Larry's left, let's see, I want to make sure I get them in order. To Larry's left is Ted Estes, who is a programmer on Dialed In and worked on Twilight Zone, obviously doing the same thing. Over Pat's left shoulder, that's me, back when I had hair. And the other guy, Scott Slomiani, he works for Larry right now, as a matter of fact, at Larry's company. Go ahead, next slide. By the way, 3 of those guys are on Dialed In, Pat, Ted, and myself. So, and it's that way with a lot of companies, you know, where a lot of us are still doing it. So people you worked with back in the 80s and 90s, it's like getting the team back together again, you know. It's a lot of fun. Let's see. So I thought it might be a good time to tell the story about how Pat Lawler got a hold of me and asked me to do the art for Dialed In. And back in the old days at Williams, where Williams on California and Chicago, Pat had an office, and really, any time you did a game for anybody, they would usually pull you into the office, close the door, and whisper to you, you know, what the idea was for the game. And that whispering went on all the time because there was a lot of competition, not only between companies, but between game designers too. We were paid, at least a lot of us were paid you know, a basic fee, but then we got royalties too. So if your game did well, you made more money. So you didn't want people stealing your ideas. So that's the way it happened back then. I'd get pulled into, let's say, Pat's office, and he'd whisper like, what would you say if I said we had the license to the Addams Family? And I'd get all excited, you know, and then that whispering would go on, you know, forever. That's just the way it was. Now it's not whispering anymore, but I did get a call from Pat like about, I guess it was 3 or 4 years ago. And we're friends, so we talk routinely, and we'll have lunch and stuff like that, you know. But Pat was excited, you know, and I didn't know what was up. And it kind of shocked me because he told me, hey, I'm going to do a pinball machine, and I'm going to do it with Jack, with Jersey Jack. And man, my jaw dropped when I heard that because I really thought Pat was done. But he went on to explain it to me, just briefly. He didn't give me the whole plot until I committed to the game, but it was exciting for me, and ultimately I committed to do the artwork. And then he went into the story just like he used to back then. And the game wasn't completely fleshed out. There wasn't a name for the game, as I recall. But he described this futuristic city. We didn't know it was Quantum City. And he described it as like a chrome, shiny type place, you know, and described a corrupt government, kind of a powerful, evil government with corporations that are corrupt and screwing people over, you know. And then he talked about how one of these companies invents this phone that is mysterious and super powerful and can cause natural effects to happen and such, you know. And by the way, the phone can watch you do things, you know, so it like works both ways. And I'm thinking 1984, George Orwell and Big Brother, that kind of stuff, you know. And I'm excited, you know, I'm on board at this point. And then he mentioned that, by the way, there's going to be a phone on the game, and it's going to be interactive. And as I recall, by that time, Ted had already done a test and figured out that the player could communicate with the game with his own cell phone, which I thought, okay, how do they do that? You know, that's not my job. I don't worry about that, but it sounds kind of magic. So I have to stay in order or I'll wander off. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, go back to that one. I forgot to talk about that slide. At the beginning, I didn't have a lot to go on. I had Quantum City and the corporations and everything, but nothing was really locked down. But I knew that there was this phone, and Pat had also told me that the phone was lost and found by like an everyday type guy. And I'm thinking like Tom Hanks or Jimmy Stewart, you know, for people to remember Jimmy Stewart, you know, I'm thinking someone like that, you know. But, so he's not really a big, handsome hero type person, you know. So this is just me doing some blue sky thinking on my own because I wanted to start working, you know, on these characters. Tried a female. The middle guy just looks like a game show guy, I don't know. The one down there in the corner, I was thinking John Belushi. And I Googled him, and he used to do this raise his eyebrow thing, you know, I can't do that, you know. But those were all like, went by the wayside. Now you can do the next slide. Okay, so at the very beginning, I think Pat was working on a whitewood. I couldn't look at the whitewood. I was living in Illinois at the time. I live in Tennessee now, so I could go over and check things out. But he did send me a Playfield drawing, so that's what I was working from. And when I started Playfield, it's my philosophy to solve problems in what I call the heart of the Playfield. Let me get some more wire here. And I consider this area above the flippers valuable real estate. And I'm always nervous until I solve that problem. I mean, I can't sleep at night. I'm just thinking about it all the time. So this is where I start all the time. So I had Quantum City, or it wasn't Quantum City at the time, but I just started to develop the look for that city down here. That's something I had. Another thing, I'm trying to do some problem solving with inserts, but I'm confining my work down here. Obviously it changes later on. Here I'm getting into the upper play field a little bit. doing things there. Quantum City's still there, but it's pretty simple. I'm also simplifying. If you look at a Playfield drawing that has everything on it, you'll have like a migraine headache, and you'll probably fall down and dead. You can't figure out what's going on, so I simplify it. I don't think it's that visible in that shot, but I do that immediately. Go to the next slide, maybe you can see that a little bit. Okay, this is a good example of simplifying it. Just these are plastic parts here, elevated plastics or butyrates. Simplifying it just so my brain can see the real estate underneath it. And I work in Photoshop now. Ew. I work in Photoshop now. I'm freaking myself out seeing my, whoa. Work in Photoshop, so I have layers I can turn on and off. Before 2000, for me, this was all traditional artwork. It was all drawn and painted by hand. I cried when I had to give that up. And my kids taught me how to use the computer, along with a couple of other people that helped me. So that's how all this is done. I rarely pick up a pencil anymore. The Quantum City here that you see was sketched in pencil, scanned, and brought into Photoshop. A lot of this stuff is all digital painting, but these are some elements I have. Some of them existed, some of them didn't. We had a few characters. I love these mysterious eyes. I just thought they represented evil. They could be the head of the government, could be the head of the corporation, and I kept forcing those into my artwork, and Pat didn't buy it. It went bye-bye. But in both of these, here I'm working right down here in the heart. I knew we were going to have spiders, all kinds of disaster, petulance, kind of like the plagues in Egypt, I was imagining it like that. Drones, UFOs. So just peppering it with that. But I was trying to get this group of characters that ultimately it didn't pan out. Some of that stuff might be picked up in a future game. By the way, by now we had another name, but I had to remove those names just because that could become another game. So I have to be careful what I talk about. Let's see, one thing Pat really zoomed in on right away, he liked this area down here. I ultimately call this my hero guy. He's the hero guy who finds the phone and ultimately realizes what it's doing. It's wrecking his life, But now I kind of see it as the player. I kind of see that guy as the player, too. That's me. Next slide, please. Now we're getting tight because I took that hero guy that Pat liked, and he told me, he said, take that guy and make him big and put him right in the middle up there. And so that's what I did. I have Quantum City down here. I got a sketch of the hero. Early development on the drones, which changed later because we have an actual drone toy in the game, so my drone had to look like that drone, but I kind of like that drone with the big eyeball. This, by the way, represents Bob. Previously he was down at the heart of the playfield, and nobody liked my Bob, so as a matter of fact, there is no physical Bob that I don't think there is in the game. Now over on the right, on your right, just same thing, just getting into some color, doing some problem solving, in my mind, I'm trying to establish a color palette for the game. There's going to be a lot of red, a lot of blue. God knows it better not be violet or purple, which is fine with me, but with some people it's not so fine. Let me get back on track here so I don't forget anything. Let's see, we are on, okay. Another big thing is, like I say, this is the heart of the play field, so this is my focal point. I really want the eye to go there. Also, as the playfield artist, I'm trying to use art to lead the shots, to draw the player up into the game, to get their eye going that way. So I'll use any excuse to make that happen. And I try to do that throughout the playfield, too. Next slide, please. A problem for me is always when there's an upper flipper up here. And I didn't do it as much here, but sometimes I kind of have a swoosh, like a laser swoosh or an energy swoosh coming across here to lead the player up that ramp. But a lot of times that's a problem because it interrupts the whole flow of everything else going up. So it makes me crazy. Here's a rough sketch of the train that was put in, and I wrestled with that a couple of ways till ultimately we settled on what we wanted. Developing some more features here in the upper playfield. We had missiles on there, but some guy told us to get rid of those, I think. Let's see. Okay, and the next one, number 9. For me, number 9. For you guys, just the next slide. This is the final playfield as you can see it on the floor today. And if you look at it, you can see why I simplified those early drawings to work on. It just saves me a lot of grief trying to figure things out. By the way, if you have questions at any point, because I don't do this for a living, and I forgot to tell you what was on that one slide and explain it, feel free to raise your hand, and you don't have to wait till the end. Okay. Next slide. Back to the quiz. Go ahead. I saw that guy first. Now, yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's in the background, almost dead center. So come on up later on. Okay, next slide, please. I'm sorry? Whirlwind. That was my first. When I started working in pinball, I was afraid to do a whole game. It scared the heck out of me. So I just agreed to do Backglasses. I did Jokers and Police Force, working with Python. And then by then I was addicted to pinball, to be honest with you. After the first one, I was hungry for another one, and another one. And then I thought, I'll do the whole game, you know. So I was kind of scared to do the whole game, but and by the way, that was my first game with Pat Lawler. He was the game designer on Whirlwind. I think I've been involved in 37 games. Whirlwind was the first complete game. And I think I've done I don't know how many I've done with Pat, but I worked with Pat both at Williams and Bally, and then Stern and now. Yeah.
What's your favorite game that you did with Pat
I guess I'd have to say Twilight Zone, but I have a couple of them I like a lot, but that has to be my favorite. Okay, I'm losing track of my notes here, sorry. Here we go. Okay, again, this is early on in the development of the game, and I'm drawing a Backglass, but our Backglasses have LCD screens in them now, so you have to leave a big open area there for the LCD, but what we were thinking was the background art would flow right into the LCD. I wasn't concerned about it. At this point, I had to get a look for Quantum City, the futuristic city. So I'm drawing it and adding color. I did a whole bunch of these, by the way, color sketches. I'm also thinking Blade Runner. I went back, looked at Blade Runner again, and trying to get, the graphics around the buildings and a lot of motion animation going on. Plus, I'm working with Jean-Paul de Win, who, by the way, he's the Hobbit artist. He's in the Netherlands. And he was doing our video work and some modeling and stuff. So he wanted to see my version of Quantum City so he could model it. And this is what I sent. I sent him these two on the top, and then they needed more so they could pan across the city. So I had to add on. It became a big perspective nightmare for me. But let's go to the next one. Usually I have a lot of tight sketches for games, and I have a lot of loose sketches, but I had a flood at my studio, and I haven't recovered the notebook that has the drawings for this Backglass in it. So I have them, I just don't know where it's at. The only important art I lost was for Teletubbies. That Teletubbies got dripped on, and I did a book, and the sketches were destroyed. The artwork survived. So now I'm trying to get an artist, someone who can evaluate my Teletubby sketches, which you call someone and tell them that. It goes right with pinball, doesn't it? Teletubbies, pinball, Tinky Winky, block that ball, you know. Anyway, these are some, I do a lot of thumbnail sketches just anywhere I'm at when I'm thinking of stuff, you know, so that is what you can see here. I love this device up here. When you look at the game, you barely see it. I worked on it a lot, but drew that and then basically painted it in the computer. One thing, because our game has the LCD in here, you hardly see any of this border space, plus it's not illuminated down there around the screen. So that's why I'm showing it. I get a chance to show it to someone, because I did a lot of work down there. These are you can put things, the nice thing about doing pinball artwork is you get to inject part of yourself into it. So I put some books here, 1984 Deja Vu, Arachnid Attacks, UFOs I have known, things like that. The button you can barely see on the game, but there it is big. The button resides right down here. If you look really close, you can see it on the game. For the floor, I was thinking just like Alien, spaceships like Alien, or really 2001, any of the Star Wars, any of that hardware was what I was thinking of when I was designing this. But I saw this as one of three things when I first introduced it to Pat. Because, again, you have the screen in here which interrupts it, but you want to set a stage for it all. So I saw it as a control room for the government, or a control room for the corporation, like the corporation that has the phone, you know, and they're monitoring the whole city, you know. Really, the government makes more sense, but it could also be a TV studio from the I can't remember the signal or the call sign for the TV station. So it could be any of those things, which gives you an excuse to see what's going on all over town on these displays. Next one. This is the collector's edition Backglass, which is fun because by this time, this is one of the last things I did on the game. I think I was working on it in December or January, so I could pull in a lot of what was going on in Quantum City, a lot of the action. I had a lot of artwork that was rendered, so I'm basically working with content, designing it. I don't know how many of you have seen that yet, but it's all new artwork going around. Next slide, please. The next one after that one. There we go. This is Jean Paul. By the way, Jean Paul is a young guy from Holland, and Greg knows more about this, Greg Ferris. I don't know if he wrote a letter to you, Greg, or what, but he wanted to work in pinball. He's a young guy, and he ended up coming to Williams and working as like an apprentice or a gopher or whatever, and he worked at Williams for, what, I don't know, 2 years. 2 weeks. That's a bit different than 2 years. Well, he got some pinball cred, didn't he? So anyway, he was the artist on The Hobbit. And now he did all our video artwork. He did the user interface for the TV station, did the disaster animations, and he also took my sketch that I saw earlier and made this beautiful city. Like, I drew the sketch and I thought, oh man, I'm so glad I'm not modeling this, you know. And like 2 weeks later, I get a city. Yeah, it's beautiful. He's easy to work with. Next slide, please. Anybody know this one? Not, you're not, it's not fair, Martin. Go ahead. No. Yes. Yeah. And by the way, who do you think inspired me for that one? I should have anybody back there? A celebrity, a singer, lives in France. Yeah, there you go. So you can get, both of you guys come on up later on and give me your address. Next slide, you can see Madonna. That's the way I remember her. Next slide, please. This is the development of a couple of the characters, Betty, and Pat and Ted, and me too, you know, I mean, probably anybody from my generation, very fond of roadside attractions. And Pat's just fond of this kind of stuff anyway. So they mentioned they wanted to have a character in the back, and Pat knew right away her name ended up being Betty. And I don't know how it happened, but somehow I thought she was supposed to be Grandma. I'm the only one that thought that, and I drew Grandma here, whapping the pinball off the ramp, you know. And I sent it to Pat, and he goes, "What's with Granny?" You know? Anyway, so I had a lot of characters to choose from, a muffler man type thing. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure it did. No, I don't. Someone named her. I don't. It was Pat, I guess, named her Betty. I don't know. Anyway, Pat said that Ted had a little bit of research on roadside attractions, so he sent me like about 100 roadside characters, which are Santa Claus, Uncle Sam. There's a lot of bikini-clad women, too. Lumberjacks, I don't know how many of you as kids, you ate at like a pancake lumberjack place, you know. That was my exposure to those characters. Next slide. The electric company guy, QED, which stands for Quantum Electric, I can't remember what the D stands for. So this is a development for him. At the time, I wasn't sure what we were going for, so I tried some thuggish-looking bad guys. Pat also mentioned back in the 60s, the electric companies all had a character named Reddy Kilowatt, who was made out of lightning bolts. He was really cool. I remember going to pay the electric bill with my mom, and the guy would give me little figurines of him. So I tried a few of those, and masked characters, you know, whatever. Art Deco people like from Radio City Music Hall in New York. So I submitted these top drawings first. Then Pat gave me some feedback. He asked to see more on the Reddy Kilowatt type guy, and he liked this guy with a helmet. And this is really where we ended up with this character right here. This is the figure that moves back and forth on the playfield that you can whack. Because these guys, they just don't come out of nowhere. There's loose sketches, there's thinking, there's thumbnail sketches, there's tighter sketches, and it evolves over like a month or two, you know. And then it can be changed, you know, like a year later, all of a sudden, when you're making decals, now he's got a name, QED, you know, so you decorate him. By the way, we have let me see if it's in here. I think we have not, I guess it didn't make the cut, but our model maker or toy maker is Dave Link. He's a Chicago guy who's worked on tons of games across the country, probably around the world. So we sent him these drawings, and Dave models them. He's done a lot of work in pinball. He's a cool guy. He's been around a while. So he did both Betty. He did Betty, the electric company guy, QED, and he did the train stations for us as well. By the way, when we first met him, I think Greg introduced me to him. Dave had built his own haunted house. It was like Disney quality with characters and stuff, and it was like worked on it all the time. It was magnificent. That was my first exposure to him. So this would be the model that Dave produced down there, or the toy. Next slide, please. We just have some cabinet stuff here. When we worked, this is not a licensed game, but when we work on licensed games, you get a style guide, and a style guide is like for somebody making a Happy Meal, you know, or Burger King or clothing or something like that. They don't understand you have 4-foot wide canvases to cover. You know, playfield, a cabinet side, a back box, cabinet front. Backglass, just butyrates or plastics. There's a ton of real estate, so we keep going back to the licensor getting more information. But this is the biggest piece of real estate on the game. And when I first started working on it, I realized it's like in Jaws where you're going to need a bigger boat. I needed a bigger computer because things have gotten such that the files are huge, so you can't have enough RAM, you can't have a fast enough computer. But it's a lot of fun to work on. Again, I have a lot of content here to work on, and I sent a million different versions of this. Here we have Betty up on the left. I wasn't going to have the phone guy in the middle originally. We were trying other things because you saw him on the playfield. Betty's in the middle. He's off to the side. But in the end, the hero guy ends up in the middle getting all the attention. Cabinet side. Next slide, please. Backbox. Went through a couple of versions of this. I'm showing 3. The hero with the phone. I really like Betty, so I tried her wherever I could, you know. And ultimately, last minute, we went with the UFOs. And it was my title piece as well. Backbox is a difficult shape to work with. It's not a perfect rectangle, at least ours is not a perfect rectangle. So it's thin, you gotta, a lot of times, distort things. Next slide, please. Cabinet front. This basically stayed the same as it was, except when you do a game, in addition to the usual content, telling the story, all that stuff, we liked, all of us artists, designers, we like to decorate the inserts, you know, the little plastic inserts. There's places where you need to just have a theme. And I kept working with metal and rivets, and I like that look. So I went too far, a bridge too far with that one. Had a blast working on it, but Pat said, "What's that thing on top?" And I go, "Oh man, that's going nowhere." But I saved it and used it for a lot of other things. Ultimately, we ended up like with a big V chevron, upside inverted chevron. Oops, sorry about that. Forgot to turn that off. That's my artist niece, living like in an artist commune right now, inspired by me. I'll have to get back to her. Enough said on that. Another quiz. Next slide, please. I thought this guy was going to be here, but you're already getting one. That's not the question. Who is this guy down here? The young person back there. You know who the model is? Nordman, Dennis Nordman, yeah. The original Bigfoot. I went over to his house. I was working on Whitewater. I was the artist on that game. And I went over to his house because I thought he was the perfect model for Bigfoot. He's like that tall. And so he posed for me and did these drawings. And I don't know if that was Dave Link. I think it was Jerry Pinsler, the late Jerry Pinsler, actually created the toy. I'm sorry?
Did you go along willingly, or did you have to convince him?
Did what?
Did he go along willingly, or did you have to convince him?
Oh, no, he was into it. I remember I went over to his house, and he liked to work on cars. He's been working on an old panel truck since the day I met him. And it's drivable now, but there's pieces missing, you know? And his garage had a pit in it where you could, you know, like they have in an oil change place. I thought, wow, the guy has a garage with a pit. I mean, I thought that was cool, you know. My wife would go, "What?" So, well, you already gave me. Did you? You're not. Yeah. Okay. You know what to do at the end. Next slide. I grew up in a little town in East Ohio, and this is what our arcade looked like. We had a really cool park, Tuscarora Park, and my mom would give us, like, I'm not kidding, 25 cents. And we go down there on Saturday morning, or any day in the summertime, because we were free, you know, and there was no decent TV on. And we'd be gone all day long. So you go on the penny arcade, and that's what it was called, was the penny arcade, because that's what everything cost, you know. So you go through like 10 cents there, and then you had 15 cents left over for a hot dog and popcorn and a Coke. You know, you could go fishing and everything, but I loved that place. Loved all the games, but there was no pinball in there. And I thought pinball was like something evil from, you know, I think it was The Wild One, the movie with Brando. You know, I think they played pinball in it. So I didn't know what it was. You know, I think I was 12 years old before I visited my cousins in Illinois, out in Paw Paw, Illinois, a little farming community. And there was a general store there, and we went into town when we were staying with them, went into town to get some provisions. And they had 2 pinball machines there, and I was mesmerized by them. It was like futuristic stuff, you know, kind of edgy. So that was my first exposure to pinball, and it looked like fun. You know, I had no idea where I would end up doing, but next question. I liked art and all that from the very beginning, so next slide, please. So I think I was about 10 or 12 when I met this guy, and my life has never been the same since. It was like, wow, at last, life makes sense, you know? As a matter of fact, I liked him so much, next slide, that when I was in high school, I started my own comic book. It was like a series, a comic book series, and the characters were the kids in my class and the villain. By the way, the series was Ratman and Boy Ratfink instead of Batman. Batman was on TV then. So I had Ratman and Boy Ratfink, and the villain was my homeroom teacher who happened to be a nun. I was like a little tiny Catholic school, Sister Eustacia. And by the way, anybody wanting to go into pinball, I suggest they do what I did. Like in math class, you get your binder out that says some university on the cover, and you draw a cartoon when they're teaching you math. You draw cartoons all day long. It gets you in a lot of trouble, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. Anyway, my villain was my homeroom teacher, Sister Eustacia. And I paid enough attention in science class to know there was something called the Eustachian crust of the Earth. So I thought, crust, that's the name of my villain, crust. So ultimately, my buddy John Teckel was reading the latest installment one day during study hall, and he just burst out laughing. I don't know what it was, but and Crust's head, or Sister Eustacia's head goes up, and she walks over to him, you know, looks down on him. Mr. Teckel, will you share with me what you have? And he goes, nothing, I got nothing, you know. She lifted up his desk and pulled out the comic book, you know, and I thought, oh my God, I'm dead, because in one scene, Crust was under the bridge of the Tuscarawas River in our town in a nightgown, kind of transparent, and I had smudged it a little bit, you know, and the tagline was, even I can't imagine Crust in a nightgown. And I got held after school, and I thought everybody, by the way, when she opened that up, every head in the room turned and looked at me like, you are so dead. You know? I wasn't dead, but I did almost get kicked out of school. The reason I have this slide up, when I was doing Gophers, No Good Gophers, it was a Pat Lawler game, he called ahead of time and asked me to design a tricked out golf cart. And I'd been doing a bunch of serious illustration for publishers and stuff, you know, and I could not loosen up. Everything I looked at was boring. And I just realized, you idiot, just be that kid in high school again, you know. And that freed me to do it. So I, you know, just started having fun, I guess, you know. Same thing down here. This is some art from the background of Funhouse, where really the artist is free to do what he wants, and if they like it, it stays in there. And by the way, I've done a lot of artwork for, I started out doing album covers, and you did have some freedom there, but you had to please the musicians and the record company. And then magazines, a little freedom there. Advertising, no freedom. Point of purchase, product design, no freedom, you know. So pinball was like this big breath of fresh air for me. Next slide. I'm still having fun, you know, there's still places you can do it. These are plastics on the game, and a lot of times you can't even see things, you know, when you're playing it, because it's underneath a ramp, or it might be behind a switch or something like that. But it doesn't matter. I trick things out, try to hide things back in there. I think Pat said, put some eyes in there. Next slide. Coming in the stretch. In 5 minutes, we're going to start questions, if I can fill 5 minutes of space. Bottom arch. I really fell in love with these UFOs. By the way, I drew them, and then Jean-Paul, he modeled UFOs for me. He modeled the drones for me based on my sketches. But he really improved them, and he sent me, I said, can you send me angles on those things so just make my job easier, you know? So he sends me like a gazillion angles. But it was great. So I painted, on the Playfield, there's a mass of drones over on the right. And there's probably like about 80 of them in there, you know? And I painted I had to paint, he provided the 3D renderings, but I painted them and added light and such to them. But thank you, JP, for that. Fell in love with, the meteorist, fell in love with that. Big burst in the middle. I'm really pushing that metal, whatever, fabrication there that just didn't make the cut either. But it made it to this show, didn't it? Next slide, please. Toppers. Tried 3 toppers. These are on the, I think just the collector's edition, as I recall. I'm not certain, but it's actually, this topper is actually layers of Plex, transparent Plex that are printed and then illuminated from underneath. So it has a dimensional quality to it. Started out with the QED guy up there with the Art Deco lightning bolts. This one, I'm not sure, but when I worked on slot machines at IGT, and I worked with Kevin O'Connor, and I think he may have done an Addams Family game with that Fester doing that on the top. I'll have to ask him, or maybe I just imagine that. But this was like the 3rd choice, not in order of preference, but one of the 3 choices. That's what we went with. One more quiz. Next slide. What game? You got it. Yeah. Okay, so come on up and give me your information when we're done. Next slide, please. We're done. You know, we're done with the informative part. Now you guys get to ask questions. If there's any gameplay questions, save them for Jack. He's next. Yeah. I like both of them. I like working on original stuff, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of lost leads, you know, where you go in bad directions because you're developing original characters. So at the beginning, it's like running through sand, you know. But like I said before, you're free to try things. You're free to try anything, really. And I think you have a bigger influence on the game. Your fingerprints are more all over the game because of that. What? Yeah. You know, I love a lot of the licensed games I've done, though, too. You know, I love Shrek. Man, I had fun with that. I like both of them, but one's definitely more laborious. Yeah. You and then you.
Sometimes, especially with animators, they write stuff in their drawings. Have you ever put something in design or talk about in there?
See, I really like something called a paycheck. I think you're just shooting yourself in the foot when you know. I mean, it's nice to think about all that, but man, maybe it's because I come from like a commercial, you know, more commercial advertising and stuff like that, you know. You didn't want the client seeing anything. You know, if it's fun stuff, everybody's going to see it, but I worked on a game called Radical. The designer was the late Dan Langlois, and he had me hide something in a game once. I'm not even going to say what it is. And I'm too naive and stupid to even get his joke, you know. But we had printed parts and we had to change them because of it, you know. I'm not saying other people don't do it and get away with it. I'm just too meek, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. I had a lot of fun doing that for 5 years, and I remember about 5 of them. I think the biggest guy was Rod Stewart, and it was pretty cool. I got hired there almost right out of art school. I drove a cab for a few months, and I was about 23 years old, and he came into town and was doing a concert at the amphitheater in Chicago. And we wanted to do this time exposure, like a flip book, animation book of him spinning his mic around, twirling his mic around. So me and a photographer, we were sent to the International Amphitheater to art direct Rod. And I was going to say we were the only sober guys in the room, but I'm not so sure about the photographer. It was just utter chaos backstage. I ran into some old art school friends back there, by the way. But it turned out great. We built this flip book that we specialized in complex construction, album cover constructions that folded out, things like that. So I did a lot of comps or proposals, and that was one of them. And it bit the dust. I don't know what happened to it, But so that was the biggest Uriah Heep. I don't know. Do people you remember Uriah Heep? The Allman Brothers. They did a Almond Joy, which when I look at it, looks like a Peter Max illustration, and it was a best of compilation. We did all of Mercury Records artwork. So when the Allman Brothers when they had a hit, Mercury says, we own all their early stuff, that didn't go anywhere. So let's put it out there, and make money on it. So I did a lot of early albums like that. Keith Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. A lot of country artists, a lot for Jerry Lee Lewis. He was fun to work with. Some Motown stuff, a lot of comedians. Moms Mabley, anybody in the room remember Moms? I would have great conversations with them on the phone, They treated me like their grandson or something, Jerry Lee, we did, I did a couple, I illustrated one and then designed some. But a cool story about him was my boss, I wasn't involved in this, but my boss went out to Las Vegas to do a photo session with Jerry Lee. And Jerry Lee didn't show up, and they were supposed to meet poolside for this session. Jerry Lee didn't show up. It was 10 o'clock. He's supposed to be there at 10. It was noon. Finally, Jerry Lee shows up, and he's got stitches in his eyes and his hands, He'd been in a fight with Elvis's drummer the night before. That was Jerry Lee. And then my boss, too, another story about Des Strobel. Another late, great guy, Des Strobel. Des was having lunch with him in Vegas because you had to pitch your ideas to these guys. So you would travel to where they were performing, and you'd show them sketches or what. And in the course of the conversation, Des said something about Jerry Lee's mother that he's a Southern guy, He stood up, he says, stand and defend yourself to my boss. He looked like John Lennon, my boss. So yeah, the album covers, I have a million stories about that stuff. Stood outside in a hallway with Smokey Robinson making small talk for 15 minutes one day. Then got invited into, who's the big guy from Barry Gordy. Got invited into his office with Smokey, and he says, oh, John, I see you met Smokey. There's only one Smokey. So a lot of little brushes with those guys, but it was fun. And that's probably the closest thing to a Backglass, too, a 12 by 12 album cover, because you did have that freedom. And when I was asked to do those first Backglasses, I just thought, I'll just pretend I'm doing an album cover. And that just got me comfortable and gave me the confidence, More questions? Martin?
One question and one request. Got a message online saying keep questions for those who are watching on the live stream.
Oh, okay.
And
Good point.
the name dialed in is one of those few games that has an exclamation mark on the end, like Radical. Was that always there from the start, or was that something that people?
I just put it in, and nobody says take it out. It stays. Oh, by the way, the question was, did dialed in always have an exclamation mark, or where did that come from? It's pinball, It should have an exclamation mark, I think. So nobody took it out. It stayed. I want to make sure I get people back there, but go ahead.
Did your designs always follow the game design, or did your designs ever have an option to change the game design? Like, what came first?
I didn't change many games, but artists, the big thing there that I can think of when you say that is the Playfield layout of inserts, the plastic inserts that are illuminated. When I would get most of my Playfield designs, the inserts were there. They were in place. And that heart of the playfield down there, it's important. A lot of designers will just say move them wherever you want them, or if you have something important, we'll change them, you know. But Pat, you know, he usually his inserts had a meaning there, so I haven't moved many inserts. I changed the shapes, you know, things like that. But that's the main thing that comes to mind, I guess, you know. So at the very beginning, when I'm thinking back to Funhouse and Whirlwind, at the very beginning of those games, like Rudy in Funhouse, he was a talking guy, and he, you know, we didn't know what he was going to do. So I was on my way to do a press run for, I think it was Radical, and I sat out in my truck between press runs and drew a bunch of themes for him, like one where he had captured a bunch of guys at a carnival, and they were underneath his truck, and he's going down the highway with some hot girls in the convertible next to him. That was a little bit too twisted. But, go ahead, another question. Go ahead. I thought I was out of here. Well, it was a very excited, adrenaline rushed feeling, and it's a little bit of fear in there too. You know, the fear is good because it wakes you up, you know, at night, and then the next morning you go, I got to get to work, that kind of thing. But Twilight Zone, I was super excited with what I was called in on that one, and a little thing about that, I was working on another game. I can't remember because I worked on Pat's games. At least the first one, he did two before me, Earthshaker and Bonsai Run, but I think I've done every one since then. But I was working on another game in between, and he called me, and I already knew we were doing it, but he said, we need a quick Backglass idea to send. Viacom was the license holder, and Carol Serling, Rod Serling's widow, she really was calling the shots. So we just felt if we got her to sign off on something, she didn't know she wanted to be involved in pinball, if her husband's name should be in pinball. So I had a weekend to do a rough sketch. I've shown that at other shows. And I went out and I bought a book called The Twilight Zone Companion. And in my head, I had all those episodes anyway. So I just started drawing for like the whole weekend, you know, staying up late and everything, sent it to her. And she only made one change. And in my sketch, I showed Rod with a cigarette, and Rod had died of lung cancer, and she said, remove the cigarette. Other than that, I like it. So that's a long answer, isn't it? I own one game, but I'm getting more. I'll be getting some more. I have a Funhouse. You know, I sold my games to pay for something called college tuition. And then, you know, none of my two sons, neither one of them have college debt. But at one time we had a ton of games in our basement, and we had an outdoor deck with games out there. It was a popular place for parties, you know, it was very noisy. Yeah. Yeah, I keep forgetting to repeat those questions. That was a question about the research for the game, for this game, for Funhouse, the research. Okay, Pat, at the very beginning we had the concept of Rudy. When I was brought in, I met John Crutch, who was the mechanical engineer, and he showed me like the mechanical device that would be Rudy. And Pat said he had seen a movie, Anthony Hopkins, and I think it was called Magic, that involved a ventriloquist and a ventriloquist dummy. So I boned up on all that stuff. And my kid had a Charlie McCarthy dummy. So one of the first things I had to do was sketch a head that would work around that box. So yeah, you know, I love research. One of my problems is I have to like hit myself on the head and say, stop doing research and start drawing, you dummy, you know, with everything. You know, it doesn't matter. It can be doing tire illustrations. I'll look at a million treads and patterns of treads and things. Next question? Yeah.
Years, complexity of Playfield and toys and all the layouts more advanced. Does that change the way you
Can you come up here? Could you come up and repeat that to me?
as games have gotten more and more advanced with the toys and the ramps and the things that they can do design-wise, does it change the way you approach a project, or you just do what you do regardless of that?
You just know you're in for a lot more at the beginning. But at the beginning, like I mentioned before, I really try to simplify that playfield, or it's impossible to work on. You can't even see it. I'm kind of advising another artist right now, and I sent him what I do, how I simplify it at the beginning. It gets very complicated, but it's important to remember. I should have repeated your question, you know, basically saying what's the difference between designing a playfield back in the old days when they were rather simple, and today when they're loaded with stuff, you know. And my answer was, I simplify it at the beginning, but always be aware of that stuff, because you don't want to put something important underneath a talking head or a train station or something. It's got to be visible. And you're responsible, by the way, the artist is responsible for doing sketches, you know, giving that a look. So there may be a model maker that comes in and carves those toys or buildings or whatever, but at least in my case, I've always had to noodle that stuff out ahead of time. Any more? Yeah, Greg.
I have 3 questions, but they're very brief. What's wrong with purple? Second is, can we ever see crust in a game someday? And the third question is, did you work on Old Chicago at all?
Okay, purple, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with purple. I like purple. Well, I was just told not to. Maybe I have it mixed up with green. Don't do a green cabinet. Don't do a purple cabinet. That kind of thing, you know. Yeah, I worked on Old Chicago in like whatever that was, 75, 76. I was a few years out of art school, and my roommate, Ken Cupie, it's my old roommate, when I first got out of school, he worked at Bally. And Dave Christensen was there, the great Dave Christensen, who, you know, I couldn't hold his pen, but I did draw it, you know, basically drew the artwork and everything, designed the art, and inked it, and then, I don't remember what he told me, but he wasn't happy with the quality of the inking, and he re-inked it, and he was right to do that, you know. So yeah, I worked on it, but it's what you see on the game is his final artwork. And crust, when I got called in after school that day, Sister Eustacia, she was sitting at her desk with her granny glasses, and I'm not kidding, I'm not joking. I felt like I always felt like I was in prison and they were the guards. And I wasn't the only one. They were hard on us, physically hard on us. And she's sitting at her desk, you know, and she had her arms kind of folded into her robe. And I come in and I sit down across the desk, and we're face to face, and I'm waiting for my sentence. I thought for sure I was out of there. It was 2 months before graduation. And she looks at me and she says, "This is good. This is good." And I thought, what? And I got my punishment, but briefly she tore all the pages that had her in it and gave it back to me, and I still have it somewhere. But without crust. Thanks for coming and listening to the artwork. Listening about artwork.